it's no secret, there's an American election tonight. Our time, it's already started. People are voting in America. And some of you might be caring more about politics. Some of you care less about politics, but there's no question that a lot going on. And there's a lot of feelings. And one of the gifts of not being in America right now is we're able to actually be a little less emotional about it. 50% of America thinks America is going to collapse. If this happens, the other 50% thinks America is going to collapse if that happens. And I think we could be, as outsiders, we could sit there saying, okay, nothing's going to collapse, or it's collapsing anyway. And let's take it easy. Let's get some perspective. Because that's what we're really lacking. We're lacking perspective. And what I want to ask from a more historical perspective is, how did we get here? Not how did we get to Donald Trump, but how did we get here to this world, 2020? There's no question that the biggest focus of 2020 has been COVID. And nobody knows how COVID's going to end. But much bigger things are going on in our world right now than just COVID. Our world is shifting. And we don't know into what. And whenever there's transition, people are anxious. What's the new world going to look like? Will China be the superpower? Will it be communist? Will it be extreme left? Will it be extreme right? Will it be xenophobic? Will it be nicer? Will it be less poverty? If 20 years ago people felt a certain certainty about where the world was going, in the 90s, you know, post-communism and the new internet and the economy was relatively okay, there was a certain fantasy that, you know, we've reached what they call, I forgot the term that they used at the time, but it was like a new era. An era of true democracy, an era of true freedom, an era of true progress. And no question that the beginning of the 21st century, the new millennia, within less than 2 years after we rang the bell for the year 2000, we already had 9/11. And 7 years later, we had the economic crash and the Bernie Madoffs and the subprime crisis and that kind of crisis, and a lot of depression, financial depression. And then in the last 20 years, a tremendous rise in addiction, opioids, drugs, a big rise in obesity, a big rise in mental health, and a big rise in extreme politics, very radical politics on all sides of the equation. The rise of Russia, which people thought wasn't, you know, once communism was over, it's going to go and disappear. And that's really what happened for about 10 years. And then Putin took over in 2000 and kind of tried to build Russia into a force. And China, and again, from every perspective, geopolitical, everything. It's like, you know, the world that we brought in the year 2000 and the world that we're in right now, 2020, is two different planets. 2000, technology was in an infancy, modern technology. Facebook didn't exist. Smartphones were not a thing. There might have been a smartphone or two, but nobody really had one. Most of you didn't even have email yet, or were just getting onto email. We were still consuming news through radio, TV, and newspapers. And then the world started accelerating. Like just someone pressed the pedal on our world in the year, you know, and about the beginning of the new millennia. And everything started going at full speed. So whether it's progress or regress, everything is quick. So, you know, progress, you know, certain media and social media, the good side of it, and medical progress and people coming out of poverty and, you know, millions of areas of progress, as we've spoken about in the past, like the world's really come a long way, and also regress, radicalism, xenophobia, hatred, anti-Semitism, Islamic extremism, right-wing extremism, left-wing extreme politics. Like everything went on. Like somebody put the crank on, you know, put the gear on. And the last 20 years, everything has been rushing at a speed. I mean, even COVID hit us like, whoa, and kind of slowed things down for a while, which was an unusual feeling in the last 20 years to actually have life slow down a bit. It was a bit, you know, took us a while to adjust to it. But we've been on full speed. Remember those planes that they had in the 90s, the Concorde, and which pretty much went out of style after a few explosions? You know, like our life was no longer on a regular jet. It was Concorde. We were just zipping. And every day you wake up and the world is different. I mean, like if someone told you 10 years ago that Donald Trump would be standing for a second election today, the guy from Apprentice? Really? Second election? Wow. Okay. And the whole world would be locked down in COVID, and even extreme politics. Wasn't like this 10 years ago, but it's been building. 9/11, the Afghanistan war, the Iraqi war, again, that's just from the American perspective. From the South African perspective, the transition into democracy, you know, hope, and then disappointment, and then corruption, and then the inability of creating a strong middle class, and, you know, racial tensions, and something is being pushed on full steam. Now, if I was a pessimist, which I'm not, I would say, gosh, we're all going to hell. In other words, that like we're speeding off a cliff, and this doesn't end well. But I don't see the world that way, and I think that if COVID taught us anything, is that we have no idea what to expect tomorrow. But here's what my gut and what I hope is really going on. Again, I don't claim God doesn't talk to me at night, so I don't claim to really know, although, you know, like I respect and take guidance from, you know, great leaders in previous generations and this generation. So, you know, hopefully what I'm going to share, my gut, is based on something, but ultimately I'm not a prophet. So this is just a perspective. Again, guessing the future is fool's game, and maybe I'm in a foolish mood today, but I think, you know, many of us need a bit of calming down in this era, and hopefully some of these words can calm us down. As Jews, we believe that there is an end of time. The end of time is the Messianic time, Mashiach time. It's one of the 13 principles of faith. As Maimonides says, the entire Torah is full of it. Not full of it, but full of it. In other words, full of Malay and B'davar Zeh, it's full of statements and teachings about the coming of Mashiach. And fundamentally, what is Mashiach? Obviously, it refers to an individual who will be known as the Mashiach. But Mashiach, when we talk about it, we're talking about an era in which the world's bluff is gone. What do I mean, the world's bluff? Let's take a premise. Let's say God does exist. I know some of you are still, you know, sitting on the fence on that one, but let's say God does exist. Then this world is a bluff, because the world doesn't tell you there's a God. The world tells you there's no God. I'm not talking about the people of the world itself. It covers over godliness. You don't see it. I'm staring at a screen. I'm not staring at God. I'm talking to you through a mic. I'm not talking through God. Where's God in this picture? It's you and I sitting on two sides of a screen talking. Is there God in this picture? Not at all. But as a believer, everything's God. So we live in this paradox where there's this deep truth that guides us. I mean, pretty much Most of the decisions I make each day are based on the premise that there's a God and who has wishes and who I want to build a relationship with and whose vision for this world I am part of, but I can't see him. And the Messianic age is the time when the world's bluff is finally called, when the falseness, when the sheker, when the lie of this universe, when the world no longer hides godliness, but rather exposes godliness, where God can shine through this world rather than be concealed through it. And in order for that to happen, the Jewish mystics tell us a few processes that have to take place. Obviously, you might have grown up hearing stories of Armageddon and this and that, but that's not. First of all, if World War II and World War I is not Armageddon, I'm not sure what is. But that's not really what we really believe as the, the fundamental premise of the coming of Mashiach. Those are just, scary stories. There's a deeper process that has to take place, a refinement of this world. And one of the major refinements, in the words of the prophet, is that things will finally be exposed for what they are. That you'll finally be able to call the bluff on things, that the veneer of this world, like the presentation, the political correctness will start fading, and there will be this absolute clarity of what is going on. So let's go back out of Kabbalah, out of mysticism, and go back to the world we're in. 20 years ago, the world wasn't less racist than it is now. People didn't have any less bad opinions than they had now. They just didn't have platforms to share it. Now, that was a good thing, maybe. But ultimately, whoever in the 90s thought that we've reached a new era and that the 21st century is going to usher in a time of peace, although they maybe had facts back then, the facts weren't facts. It was just a feeling. It wasn't real because the issues were still there. 9/11 didn't come in a vacuum. Radical Islam was rising for decades. A major, turning point in that was the Iranian Revolution in 1979. So this was over 20 years of festering. Racism didn't go away. Anti-Semitism didn't go away. It maybe wasn't politically correct to talk about anti-Semitism after the Holocaust, but it didn't go away. So in post-World War II, what we lived in was a nice, comfortable world. Obviously, people had their challenges, but the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, like South Africa, the people who lived in South Africa and had a good life in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, how did they do it? By living in denial, by not focusing on what's going on next door in the townships, by not focusing about, the issues of race. How many people have told me they had no idea, like whatever, it was an irrelevant part of their life. So just like South Africans, and that's a good analogy, lived within a universe that was far from perfect. It was evil. And I'll be the first one to say that. In other words, I will never, say anything that justifies what happened during apartheid. There's no justification. People lived in denial or just absolute ignorance. And that's what we lived as a humanity. We lived, for a little while after World War II and the second half of the 20th century, when you guys were growing up and you're young adults, there was a bit of a denial. But you don't deal with issues when there's a denial, because honestly, if you want to know what's going on in our world right now, it's a couple that has learned to live begrudgingly with each other after 30 years. And after 30 years, one of them says, or both of them say, I'm chatful. I'm done. I don't want this anymore. This marriage isn't good enough for me. Now, it's not the issues have been raised today. The issues have always been there. But they finally surfaced. And that's what's important to realize. The world isn't going crazy. The world is just showing us how crazy it's been going. I don't know if that's a comfort or a fact, but a comfort or a scare rather. But for me, that's this has been going on. It's not like, oh my gosh, we thought social media would be a force for good and it turned out for bad. Okay, then you were foolish. In other words, we were foolish. I never bought it, by the way, but not because I'm a prophet, but just I saw from the beginning like what it's doing to people. But let's say, for argument's sake, we thought Facebook will bring us all together and WhatsApp will bring us all together, and then suddenly we realized that it's corruptible and it could lead to bigotry and Holocaust denial. Thank God Facebook finally took that off. Geniuses. It could lead to xenophobia, it could lead to extremism, it could lead to everything. Now, it's not that Facebook was a great thing that we corrupted. No, Facebook and Twitter and everything else. I'm saying social media was a thing that wasn't thought through. It was something that developed in somebody's room in Harvard and became financially viable very quickly and grew into a multi-billion-dollar company. And very few questions were asked like, seriously? Do we know what we're doing? And I'll be honest, I've always said, like Mark Zuckerberg, I have an interesting, thought of him. He's 2 months older than me, another Jewish kid from New York. And I've been following his life as a contemporary. Obviously, we never met, but I'm the same age of him. And I think to myself, I say, I'm in my mid-30s. And I'm slowly but surely developing a little clarity of life. This kid built a platform for 2 billion people in his 20s, when he himself did not figure out who he is or what he stands for. And yet was able, through a financial model, to set the policy of the world's conversation. For me, that's mind-boggling. As with Google, two young guys, Twitter, pretty much a bunch of young, white, some Jewish, billionaires who figured out technology quickly, and they figured out how to be savvy about it. Not only made money, but created models that generate our conversation. And for me, that's crazy. So it's not as if social media was ever a great tool that we corrupted. It wasn't a thought through thing. It was just a money-making machine. It just was at the right time in the right place, generated money, and then suddenly all the Michigan of the world decided, hey, we have a great platform to start pontificating. And then you have darknet, and you have, underhanded stuff and garbage and child pornography and the whole underbelly of the internet. All this did is it exposed how much garbage we still have to deal with and how we are not where we thought we are. And here's where I'm going to get even more controversial. If we think ourselves, what happened, all these platforms basically opened in the West. And the fact that China's rising and Russia's rising, I don't think is as much credit to Russia and China, but it's to the decredit of the West that's just losing its way, and therefore these guys are rising. But what's happened to the West in the last 200 years? Fundamentally, we forgot why we're here. We had certain moments that we remembered, like World War II and this and that, but ultimately life just became about me and my pleasure and my indulgence. And slowly but surely, every value that our ancestors held dear to, we dropped. The idea that there's a God, an eye that sees and an ear that hears. Nah, there's nothing I'm accountable to. I come from a monkey. Seriously, I believe that historians are going to discover one day that we don't come from monkeys, but that's not what I believe. I believe that on the rate of the stupidest and most damaging ideas the planet has ever been introduced in, the idea that human beings come from monkeys and were not put here by a divine purpose is one of the most dangerous ideas, even if it was true. I would keep it under a cover. Because what are you telling people? That you're a bunch of animals, that your acts have no consequence, that what you do, you're anyways just, since when do you hold apes accountable for what they do? And there's no eye that sees because there's no God. And what you do, it's ultimately to your life. Yeah. If I brainwash you to be a good person, fine. If I don't manage to brainwash you, then fine. then, unlucky me. Some parents are more successful than others, but it's all a game of chance, because ultimately you're not bringing God into the picture. There's no one they're accountable to. It's only about, are they nice kids or not? Now, it started with taking away God in the 19th century, in the early 1800s, the 1700s already, in the French Revolution. Do you think that led to great ideas? You know what the next big idea was? Racism, but not just racism. I'm not talking about racism, black versus white. The whole idea of race. The 19th century was obsessed with race. The whole Nazi ideology started with the idea of race, the Aryan race. And so-called scientists basing, philosophies, and even Darwin's ideas were utilized, not that that was his intention, but they were utilized, the idea of social evolution, that there's certain races amongst the humans that are more advanced, and there's other races that are holding them back, the gypsies, the Jews, the Romas, etc. It led to stupid ideas of how to rule people, ideas like communism. Grows in the 19th century, eventually takes over Russia, China, North Korea, and has caused the death of tens of millions of people. Just one stupid idea, and it's still causing unbelievable grief in places like North Korea. And even China, to certain, the Muslim Ungars and others. And you ask yourself, okay, we've really figured this out, right? We really know where we're going. And that ideology eventually develops into straight out murder. World War II, wiping out Jews, wiping out races. It's justified for racist policies in the United States. It's justified for the most disgusting and, bigoted things. And eventually it starts taking down marriages as well. The percent of children born out of wedlock, insane. Starts destroying families, father figures. It starts growing incarceration in places like the United States. 1% of Americans are in prison. Over 2 million. Almost 1% of Americans are in prison. It's insanity. So in the 90s, we weren't in heaven. No, not even close. We just weren't aware of the world we built. And now it's all coming out. I'm not saying if everybody believed in God, everything would be solved. I do believe if everybody kept the basic Noahide laws, believe in one God, do not be blasphemous, do not kill, do not steal, do not commit adultery, do not hurt animals, and set up courts of justice, I do think it would solve a huge percent of world's problems. And it's not the religion is the answer. It's the idea that there's an eye that sees and an ear that hears that I do believe is a big part of the answer. We've lost our way. The average person has no idea what they want out of life. And today they developed a new passion, a lot of people, and it's a worthy passion, saving the planet. I think, global warming's real, and if there's anything we could do to cut emissions, it's great. But save it. But I would ask them, okay, you want to save the planet for your grandchildren, but you're not having children or grandchildren. You chose not to have. Why? Who are you saving the planet for? What do you believe in? Why do you believe humans should be here in 100 years? Why? What's wrong if the planet goes to hell? It came here by mistake, and it will go by mistake. Maybe it's the best thing that will ever happen. When the few surviving humans will be living on Mars and they'll build a new civilization, let the world go to the dogs. I'm sorry for playing that devil's advocate, but for real, what are you trying to save? It's so nice that people are trying to save the planet, but why? What drives you? Why do you want to make the world a better place? Why do you want to bring equality? What's the purpose of all this? We're just a bunch of animals in the jungle anyway. And every progress, you move forward, you take 5 steps back. In other words, if you don't have a why, if you don't have a goal, if the world's not heading in a specific direction, bigger than ourselves, then honestly, it makes so much sense why the world looks the way it does. It's a miracle it doesn't look 10 times worse. You took God out of schools. You took values out of education. You're teaching, education today means teaching kids mathematics and often just, leftist politics. And people don't know why they're here. The average person in the 17th, 18th century in America, as America was trying to start its revolution, they were talking about ideas, real ideas based on understanding the human condition, understanding the role that we are here, the role that God puts us here, a strong faith in God, a strong sense of purpose. And what's going on in our time is everything's being exposed. The bluff is being called. And that's not a bad thing. Although it's scary, it's not bad. Because it's forcing us to confront stuff that we have been in denial for 200 years. And that is, what kind of world were we creating? What are we trying to defend? When we say we're scared that China is going to get powerful, or Russia is going to get powerful, what does America stand for today? Not America. What is the West? What do we stand for? Binge watching on Netflix? Having the right to play golf 3 times a week? Having freedom to share our stupid opinions on social media? What exactly are we trying to fight for? For me, that's the big question we have to be asking. Yes, there's other great questions like the rise of world powers and global warming and xenophobia, but we're only going to solve all that when we ask one basic question. Why have we lost our way? What is the purpose of all this? Where are we going? Donald Trump is not the answer, and neither is Biden the answer. In general, politics is not the answer. Politics is just a mechanism of how to rule people. Like it's crazy, the fact that politics has taken over religion. It's almost like, the Christians and the Muslims fighting in the 8th century about who's the real savior, Muhammad or JC. Donald Trump, guys, it's not a religion. It's just politics. It's who's the guy that should run the American government, and the government's by the people, of the people, for the people. But no, we took God out of the picture. So who's our savior? Either a 78-year-old nice guy or a 74-year-old angry guy, and and their advisors, bad. For me, the fact that this election is being seen as one of the most important days is itself pathetic. It's crazy. It's nuts. Who becomes president is not the most important thing. You know what the most important thing? What's happening in homes? Marriage is collapsing. Addictions. Lack of purpose. Youth just floundering by the millions. Wasted talents. That's the stuff. To give people a why. Getting Donald Trump into the office or out of the office, regardless of what you think, it's not the answer. It's going to solve, even if it does solve anything in either way, a tiny % of your life. Your stuff is your stuff. And we have to focus inward. And what I hope happens in hopefully the next 10 years, Mashiach doesn't come. What my prayer, my prediction, my prayer is at some stage, I thought it would be COVID, but even COVID doesn't seem to be strong enough to do it. It lasted for a few months, people got reflective, but then, everything just came back right into the open, the George Floyd story and the elections and the bigotry and the now terrorism in France and the terrorism in Austria, and everything's resurfaced. I was really hoping, and I still hope. I don't know what it's going to take, but something's going to give, hopefully soon, in which the world, not just rabbis on Zoom, but the world is going to ask themselves a simple question. Where have we lost our way? What have our ideologies led us to? Where have they taken us? What world will we give our grandkids? Not because of, the extremists. In other words, the world's biggest terror right now is not the terrorists. It's not the right wing or the left wing. It's not China, Russia. It's nobody other than ourselves. We need clarity where we're going. And we just spend so much time talking about world events and nonsense, thinking that that's really what matters. Obviously, we have to fight for good things and important things. But the world will only, and us, will only find contentment and peace if we develop a stronger why. So talk to your children, talk to your grandchildren. It might fall on deaf ears for a while, but we have to start having these conversations. Guys, some of the stuff I sold you for the last 60 years, 50 years, 20 years, I have to admit, it's been false. I thought that was the most important thing, to be successful, to be super educated, to be sophisticated. But you know what I realized, my dear child? That on the road, I maybe didn't focus enough on raising you to be kind and thoughtful and faithful and generous. I taught you how to guard your money, but I didn't teach you how to spend money on worthy causes. I taught you how to make sure nobody hurts you, but I didn't realize how to teach you to put your ego on the side, to allow another person in and have a healthy romantic relationship. I taught you to focus on your career, but I forgot to tell you that having children is also a career, and maybe a much more meaningful career. I taught you that the world is your oyster and that you can do whatever you want. But the truth is, I should have told you, don't ask what you need, ask what you're needed for. It's not the world for you to conquer, but rather it's the world calling upon you to contribute. I taught you that you should become famous and super, amazing and dynamic, and I celebrated whenever you were popular and successful. But I didn't realize that often that just leads to more anxiety, depression, imbalance, and that life is not about one area, it's about living a balance of so many different areas. It's not about being successful, it's not only about having family, it's not only about being kind, it's about everything, living a life of so many circles and balance. My child, I taught you some good things as well, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry I was fooled by the ideas that were taught in the last recent history. That I thought that the ideas that our grandparents held onto for thousands of years were just primitive, and that the new world's ideas would lead to progress and make the world the best place it's ever been. I'm not sure I did. I'm not sure now that these ideas have. I'm starting to doubt where we've taken you and your generation to. Because honestly, what's happening now is not a surprise. 2 + 2 = 4. This was a natural progression of all the big, bold ideas of the last 200 years that have taken over. And this is what happens. This is what happens when you destroy family. This is what happens when you destroy faith. This is what happens when you lose dignity of life. This is what happens when you create a culture of entitlement. This is what happens when Life's only about chasing pleasure. This is what happens when the bottom line and the paycheck is all that matters, and how wealthy you are when you die, and if you make it to the Forbes 400 is the definition of your success. This is the outcome, friends. The bluff has been called. Can you see it? You might say that this year was a negative year. I don't think so. I think it's quite refreshing. Clarity is the biggest gift. I remember my sister told me that she was gifted. She was once told by a mentor of hers, I bless you with clarity, because that's the greatest blessing at all. And I believe it. I've shared that blessing hundreds of times. Because if you know what's going on, if you see the real deal, you're a million steps ahead. Maybe my clarity is wrong. Maybe you have a different clarity of what's going on, and I would love to hear it. But for once, let's actually have an honest conversation about where our world is coming from and where it's going, and what we've done to contribute it. Shkayach, everybody, and thank you so much.